please give Kate Nutt a warm welcome, Director General, External Relations, Government of Jersey.
Thanks very much, Elliot. I'm not sure there whether you realise that although I'm a Group Director or I'm a Director General, so just to confirm, I am a Group Director, although I think, given everything I've experienced with Brexit over the last 2.5 years, I probably am deserving of a promotion now. But anyway, so it's a real pleasure to be here to speak to you today about Brexit. And I think I've got absolutely impeccable timing, because, indeed, and as I was listening to the media last night, I kind of reflected on this. It's taken 2.5 years to get to a point where there might be an agreement on the table, and of course that happens less than 24 hours before I'm due to speak to you all. And I was thinking back to when I got this job. I accepted this position 8 weeks before the UK's vote to leave, and I moved to Jersey, lock, stock and barrel, 4 weeks before the vote to leave. And I remember thinking at the time, probably like most of you, it would be close, the vote would be close, but it probably wouldn't be an exit. And therefore, I came to Jersey with great plans about what I would do with external relations. And I remember very vividly sitting there in the kitchen the morning the result came through with my head in my hands, thinking, my gosh, now what have I signed up to for the next few years? But it has been an interesting experience, and I am pleased I'm here. And actually, Jersey is making some really good progress in our preparations for Brexit. Now, I'm not here on my own today. I have come with colleagues. You've got 7 civil servants for the price of 1, which is unprecedented. We don't normally come out en masse like this. So you must take advantage of it in the questions at the end. We've got 30 minutes, I think, Q&A if I stick to time, and then we're hanging around afterwards if you want to ask us anything on a one-to-one basis. So just to do some quick intros, you know I'm the Group Director for External Relations. I've got David Walwyn here. David, where are you in the crowd? Right, he's over there at the back there. David's Director of External Relations. He leads actually on the Brexit programme, cross-government Brexit programme for the department. Darren Scott, who's the Director in Growth, Housing and Environment, is also at the back there. Darren, you won't escape. Darren's been leading primarily on transport issues. Greg Morell, who is also at the back next to Darren, is Acting Director of Marine Resources. So Greg's been looking at fisheries issues and also environmental legislation. Most of the legislation we're needing to amend, a big swathe of it, relates to environmental issues because of the Protocol 3 link. So Greg has been very busy. Steve Webster, who's at that table as well, is working across policy areas that growth, housing and environment have responsibility for. Luke Goddard is here as well, immigration, migration and security issues, things like the EU settlement scheme, passports, security and justice cooperation. And last but not least, Tom Werry, who has decided to sit at a different table at the front, and he's the lead policy advisor on financial services. So you've got a good cover of the main policy areas here today affected by Brexit. But this is just some of the team, as I say at the top of the slide. This Brexit programme is a really cross-government endeavour. Every department is involved, but these are some of the big policy areas affected. So I'm here today to talk to you about the domestic implications for Jersey. And this was a slide that I had in the pack before yesterday, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to leave it in because I think it still stands. There is an agreement on the table. The Prime Minister has been pulling in her ministers overnight. There's a big meeting this afternoon. There were PMQs earlier. I've managed to catch up on what happened there. But whatever happens, we're not quite there, are we, with a deal? In fact, I think we're still quite a long way away. And some of these headlines from these were Monday and Tuesday, kind of illustrate why. We don't know. We know there are divisions in the Cabinet. We don't know particularly how Parliament's going to react, although we know that there are differing views there. The Tory party is divided, and we don't know what the DUP is going to say about that customs border. So I think it's all still to play for. And while I made some tweaks to my presentation last night, actually by and large, I think from a Jersey perspective, we just continue doing and planning as we were doing before. And really, from the very beginning, that was for the potential for there to be a no deal. So while I think it's a really good and positive step forward that we've got to this point, I think we as an island continue in the same vein. So, As I was reflecting last night on me sitting in the kitchen with my head in my hands, once the shock of the vote to leave had worn off, I actually thought about it some more and I reflected that Jersey was in a pretty good position, the government was in a pretty good position, and I don't know whether you remember or have noticed, but within 2-3 days of that vote to leave, we published a report to the states which set out what we saw as Jersey's position at that time. It's not rocket science if you look back at it now, but it did set out the substance of our relationship with the UK and the EU, the areas that we thought would be impacted, and the types of objectives and the objectives that we would have in discussing our position with the UK government going forward. And we'd also at that point laid a really good platform for the discussions with UK government to meet, so that we could hit the ground running once discussions really kicked off. And if I was to boil down 4 very key, very headline objectives from the states reports that we've published since that time, these would be the 4. They seem fairly simplistic, and there's a lot that sits underneath these, but they really are key, and they help to explain, some of the work that we've been doing. So the first is around the continuation of the fundamentals of our existing relationship with the UK. By that, we're talking about being able to travel freely, being able to trade freely, having a monetary union, and actually Brexit stuff not encroaching on our constitutional position, our autonomy. In relation to number 2, we're thinking about our relationship with the EU. This has been tweaked a bit. So we started off saying what we want is a Protocol 3 type relationship. We want to be able to trade in goods. The discussions have been protracted. They've been difficult. Now I think where we've landed, although obviously we would like that, what we don't want is anything that's less advantageous than where the UK ends up with the EU, and that is still very much all to play for. The third objective is around making sure Jersey is really best placed to take advantage of the opportunities, particularly trade opportunities coming out of Brexit. And the fourth area is around making sure that government has the right structures, the right people, expertise, investment in place to answer the challenges of Brexit. And I'm going to start with number 4 first because it's actually kind of easiest, although I will whip through it quite quickly because it might be the area that you're probably least interested in. But it helps to give it context. So this is what we've had in place since the beginning. We've got work streams that run across the bottom. They're cross-departmental work streams on the key policy areas: customs and trade, financial services, transport, ag and fish, etc., etc. These work streams meet weekly. They meet with UK counterparts now weekly as well. And they are feeding their work into and their deliberations into the Brexit Working Group, which I chair. That meets once a month. That has every government department represented around the table, where we take stock of progress. We look at where the issues are. We look at what needs to be escalated to ministers. And those issues go up to the Brexit Ministerial Group, which again meets once a month with key ministers around the table, and that provides political direction to the work that we're undertaking. Sitting alongside this, of course, is our engagement with the UK government. That has been really positive from the start, but I would say over 2018 it's really ramped up. So we have officials, I have officials in London every week, phone calls every week with counterparts in Whitehall. We have contact group, which is senior officers in Cabinet Office and DECCU meeting once every 2 weeks. That deals with some of the knotty stuff that we potentially needs to go to ministers, but we try and resolve at officer level. And then we have really good engagement with UK ministers as well. So Robin Walker is our minister in the Department for Exit in the European Union. We meet at least once a quarter with him, but actually that's more often now. We saw him last week in the Isle of Man at the British Irish Council, along with David Liddington, who's a Cabinet Office Minister as well. And that was a really good forum in which to update and discuss on progress from a Jersey perspective on negotiations. So the engagement with UK government is really good. The structures are in place. The only extra one I would say that we've added there, it's in black, which actually I think is a really bad colour for contingency planning. We've been thinking about that no deal from the start, but given, I think particularly over the summer, things started to look a little bit more like we were heading towards a hard Brexit. We actually put a formal work stream in place, a formal contingency work stream of external relations and the emergency planning office and several other departments as well in place to look at what government already had in place and to review and refresh our plans. So that work stream is in place, it's meeting regularly, and I'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing there later on. Now, I haven't got time today to cover every work stream, so I thought what I'd do would just be to cover some of the ones that perhaps you'd be most interested in, although very happy to take any questions on any of the other areas. One of the the biggest things for us in relation, if we're thinking about our relationship with the UK, is that customs union. This has been a big objective for us from the start. The reason for that is, at the moment, the customs union for Jersey exists because of Protocol 3 attached to the UK's Treaty of Accession. Once the UK leaves, Protocol 3 falls. So there's no customs union anymore with the EU. There's no formal trading basis for goods for us with the EU. And in terms of the UK, and 88% of our trading goods is with the UK, we end up falling back on the Royal Charters. Now, the Royal Charters are great. They're the bedrock of our relationship with the UK, but they are centuries old. And in a modern trading environment, a responsible government would be looking, as we have been doing, to formalise a new customs arrangement. So that's what we have been, one of the things we've been busy working away on. Beginning of this year, we submitted some high-level guiding principles to the UK government, which set a framework for our negotiations. Those principles covered things like we need the new customs arrangement to be proportionate to the size and scale of our economy. We want it to respect our constitutional position. We want fiscal autonomy, so we still want to be able to collect GST and excise. We don't want it to impact on those areas. We want all of those things to be taken into consideration. And negotiations have been ongoing over the last few months. And I'll be honest with you, it has been a negotiation. It has not been a walk in the park. And partly that's because, although both sides absolutely want a deal, we're coming at it from slightly different angles. We are approaching this on a peer-to-peer basis. We're equal partners. The UK, of course, has an eye to whatever agreement it signs having an impact on a future agreement with the EU. And one of the things that it's been quite concerned about is how robust, for example, our customs processes and procedures are, and whether we might be viewed as a weak link in the chain if it were to sign up on a future customs relationship with the EU. So we've had to provide a reasonable amount of assurance in that regard, but it has led to some interesting discussions around things like governance, dispute resolution, audit and inspection, how future international agreements that the UK might sign might impact on our customs arrangements. Now, I'm pleased to say that those discussions are going well. I'm not going to I can't announce today that we have actually got a document that we can sign, but we are very nearly there. And I'm hopeful that within the next couple of weeks there will be an announcement and there will be something that the Minister for External Relations can sign. And that would be quite a big and quite significant outcome, I think, for Jersey and indeed the other Crown dependencies as well. So that's our relationship with the UK Gov, or with the UK. In relation to the EU, it's obviously more complicated, not least because we're not leading those negotiations. One of the biggest impacts for us without a customs deal, as you'll all know, will be on the fisheries industry, because the bulk of fish and aquaculture that we trade goes south. And if there isn't a customs deal, we'll have tariff and non-tariff, or likely to have those barriers in place, and that will be significant for the industry. So obviously that's something we want to avoid. But the other reason this is complicated is because in looking at its new potential future economic partnership, the UK is having to consider a whole raft of regulation. It's looking at the common rule book, so harmonisation of rules across things like environmental and manufacturing standards. It's looking at what is being termed the level playing field. It's not necessarily on the same page as the EU as regards the level playing field. The EU is saying, well, if you want market access, you've got to sign up to all this stuff. We want equality and competition regulation. We want state aid harmonisation. There's some things perhaps in financial services and tax that we'd quite like to see the UK doing. If you do those things, you can have access. But if not, obviously, there is more of a discussion to be had. Now, for us, that's also a potential issue because we have to look at the common rule book and we have to look at the level playing field, which is what we're doing at the moment, and assessing whether we think that we could meet those sorts of requirements. If it were the whole lot, could Jersey sign up to that? Would Jersey want to sign up to that, and what would the impact be? So that is a very live piece of work that's ongoing at the moment, and again, very live discussions that are going on with relevant departments, and I think we'll be seeing more on that in the very near future. The third objective here is actually, it's not all doom and gloom, and the third objective is one about opportunity, actually. So what can we do to build our trade links with the UK and EU, but also primarily further afield? And there are three elements to this. The first is, it's been a government objective for quite some time to to have World Trade Organization membership extended to us. WTO membership it's a big agreement for those that don't know, over 100 odd countries. It facilitates free trade in goods and services. It would benefit Jersey because if we want to export, you're likely to have beneficial tariffs, the removal of non-tariff barriers. It's the basis, actually, WTO is the basis for FTAs. So if we were to get new free trade agreements in the future, you'd be halfway there if you had WTO membership. There are protections for dispute resolution, so if we were treated unfairly by other jurisdictions, there's a place to go. And also, quite frankly, if we're going to be a credible global trading partner across a range of different areas, having WTO membership is actually quite a good thing to do. So we have looked at that agreement in quite some detail, and the issues boil down to three main ones, really. The first is that not all of Jersey industry is open. Some of it is protected. That is a kind of tension with an agreement that is about free trading in goods and services. The second issue is that with our housing and work law, you can't just come here and set up a business, get a licence and off you go. Again, there's a conflict, there's a bit of a tension there. And the third issue is around some technical issues around industrial property rights. Again, as with customs, I'm pleased to say that I think we're really very nearly there with it. I'm hoping to be able to put advice to ministers this year, which will be able to say we've found a way through all these issues, because there is a lot of flexibility with it. In 120 countries, there's a lot of flexibility with what you can and can't do. But we're getting the UK's membership extended to us, so we need to obviously have the UK in agreement. So I think that is actually also looking pretty positive too. The other area that we're looking at are free trade agreements. Secretary of State Liam Fox for Trade has written to us and said, how do you, Jersey, want to be involved in what the UK is doing on future FTAs? How do you want to be consulted? How do you want to feed in? What part do you want to play? And that's something as a government we need to consider, and we need to consider with all of you. How do we look at the regional agreements? How do we look at sector by sector opportunities and decide what works, what doesn't, and what will be the impact if we don't want to get some of these things extended to us? And that's something I envisage kicking off a conversation with industry that I envisage we kick off in the new year. And the final area, which I'll say a bit more about in a minute, is our global market strategy, which is looking at how we're building government-to-government relationships with markets outside the UK and the EU. Now, I can't talk about trade without talking about financial services, obviously. A lot of people have said to me since the beginning of Brexit, well, we're outside for financial services, we're not part of the EU, so really, is there that much impact? And actually, to a large degree, that is probably true, but there are some indirect impacts. And I think the one I'd particularly pick out from this slide, if you can see it, is actually number 2, because what we need to start thinking about, or what we are thinking about, is how do we mitigate the diminishing influence that the UK has in the EU. So when it leaves, it's not round the table to defend our interests anymore. And a very live symptom of that, if you're in financial services, you'll be aware, is the current piece of work that is ongoing by the EU Code Group on business taxation, looking at whether countries are cooperative or not in relation to tax transparency. So we were assessed, we were screened in 2017 along with 90 other countries. We came out of that being confirmed as cooperative, but subject to some concerns the EU had around whether we had sufficient economic substance in Jersey, along with the other Crown dependencies and other jurisdictions as well. Over the last year, we've worked really closely with industry, with member states, with the Code Group, with the UK government to develop legislation to address those concerns. And I'm confident that we've done enough to get us over the line at the beginning of next year when EU finance ministers meet to decide which countries are cooperative and which countries will go onto a blacklist. But that's really the thin end of the wedge, because we're starting to see more pressure on areas that used to be member state competence, member state sovereignty, particularly financial services regulation and corporate tax rates. And there are some things coming down the pipeline that I think will be problematic for us in future. And certainly from an external relations point of view, I am thinking about how we engage with member states, how we engage in Brussels, how we engage in national governments, without the EU around the table, to make sure that we are our interests are understood and our value to Europe is understood, and we're mitigating the risks of some of these developing policies. The other area with financial services is, of course, the opportunity. And I did mention the global market strategy, and I think it's very timely to put this slide up as well, because these are some pictures of the Minister for External Relations, Senator Gorst, over the last week. He's been in the US, he's been at the World Economic Forum, he's speaking there at a Partnering Against Corruption initiative, which is really good for Jersey, reputationally, for our profile. There are a lot of other political contacts at the WF. He's also been in Bahrain, meeting the Minister for Foreign Affairs. We're looking to sign various agreements with Bahrain, an MOU on digital cooperation, for example. So good progress was made there. And he's also been in the UAE, meeting the Minister of Finance, among other contacts. One of the things we're looking to do with the UAE is to start to negotiate a new bilateral investment treaty. We received our entrustment from the UK government last week, I think, to start negotiating bits. They provide investor protection for both sides. They help to facilitate trade and more business. We've had interest from other jurisdictions to negotiate and sign a new bilateral investment treaty with us as well. So I think that's quite an exciting thing. And part of what we're doing with the Global Markets programme is going out, building gov-to-gov relationships with high growth target markets outside the UK and EU, making those political contacts, because essentially it's the governments that are deciding where those countries do business. And we're looking at signing a suite of new treaties and other agreements with those jurisdictions that will help to facilitate more business flows. So I think that is actually, that's one of the really positive things I think that's come out of Brexit, because that's a new team. The government is invested in that last year. Already we're starting to see some real tangible deliverables. Okay, so back to core Brexit. Another area I thought that you might be quite interested in is what's going on with immigration, migration, CTA and security, but particularly the immigration point, given the importance of being able to source and maintain skilled labour, particularly on the island. We will be launching very soon in January our EU settlement scheme. This mirrors what the UK is doing, but we've put in place the process ourselves. So we could have relied on the UK, but it would have cost a lot more money and it would have taken a lot longer. We have developed the IT, the processes are all in place. We'll be managing the application system ourselves, and that is, as I said, ready to go. There are 20,000 EU nationals in Jersey, about 25% of the workforce, so this is significant. Everyone will have to, if they want to remain, they will have to go through the EU settlement scheme. There is lots more information on the website about that, including in different European languages as well. So, if you are an EU national or you're employing EU nationals, I would urge you to go and have a look at that, because it gives you a lot more detail on the process. But obviously, we've been very clear with UK Gov as well about the fact that Jersey's needs in terms of labour and workforce need to be taken into account in any future immigration decisions or future immigration model. That hasn't been decided upon yet. We know what's happening on the EU side, but I think there are still more discussions to be had. But we have been very clear what our objectives are, and they have said they do understand those. The second objective here relates to the common travel area. That is done and dusted, I'm glad to say. That is agreed. CTA continues. We can travel without passports. Crown dependencies continue to be part of that, so that's quite a positive thing. And the third objective on this, the main objective here, is just around how we're working on law enforcement and on security cooperation and that sort of things. Obviously, really fundamental to the safety and security of the island. We are plugged into discussions with the Brexit Law Enforcement Group. We don't have formal mechanisms, as it were, to plug into European processes and systems and the arrest warrant and such, but there are a lot of discussions and positive informal agreements in place that mean that that's going very well as well. So, last slide on... no, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. That's just a slide on the EU settlement scheme. Last slide on the kind of one of the core policy areas, and that's transport. I'm pleased to say that even the event of a hard Brexit, looking at aviation links, looking at our ferry services, we don't really see that there'll be much impact there, particularly with aviation. Most of the traffic goes to the UK. We manage our own air traffic control services, and although we share UK and French airspace, we're pretty sure that will be fine. Where there is a potential issue is around car travel, and if you read the papers you'll be aware of this. We think that there will be a problem for us to be able to drive on the continent if in the event of a hard Brexit, and therefore we are requesting that UK extends the Vienna Convention to us, and that will give us cover to be able to drive on in France and Germany and so forth. The regulations are with the states, so there will have to be a debate on that. Obviously, there are certain things we need to do and we need to sign up to if we are to get Vienna extended to us. But what I would say is that the Department for Transport has been very clear with us that it does see a risk if we don't have Vienna in place for us being able to drive abroad. And you cannot implement it in a kind of two-tier system. It can just be for cars that are going off island. It actually has to be for the island as a whole. But equally, the main thing is just to have the legislation in place in time for a hard Brexit. That in itself is enough. We don't have to have everything else set up for us to be able to drive overseas. I suppose the other area really with transport, but I will come on to that now with contingency planning. There are some big implications there if there were a hard Brexit. And what I would say in relation to contingency is even though we've got a deal on the table, I said at the beginning, we're going to continue as we originally started. UK stepped up its contingency planning over the summer, particularly over August, and we mirrored that. We already had plans in place, but we asked departments to review and refresh what they were doing. They're not static documents, they're live documents, they're iterative. And we set up the 8th work stream as well to formally manage the process. A lot of what we've done around customs, around the settled status scheme, around Vienna, we've laid some other new legislation as well, for example on sanctions. That's all ready to go on the 29th of March. So that's part of our contingency planning. But of course we're thinking about the actual impacts, the impacts we would feel as islanders if the UK did crash out. And the sorts of areas that we're looking at won't come as any surprise. I mean, it's mainly around supply chain. So what happens to food, to fuel, medical supplies and consumables, what happens to other essential goods, essential parts for critical national infrastructure on the island. You know, what happens with those things if the ports are snarled up and if there are issues getting planes in, what happens getting people on and off the island if the infrastructure is affected in the UK. What I would say on that is, the government is speaking to retailers, we're speaking to the transport providers, there are plans in place, but at the moment I don't think there is a need particularly to sort of publish anything more. I think we will wait to see how things pan out over the next few weeks. And if necessary, then there'll be more communication in the new year. But at the moment, the message is, the planning is underway, it's in place, and as with everything else we're doing on Brexit, I'm confident that we have, we're doing what we need to do. So on that note, I think I stuck to half an hour almost exactly. That is the kind of Brexit update, such as I can give it really at this stage. And I think the floor is now open for questions, and one hand has already gone up at the back. So yeah, please.
So Simon Nash of People.je. I've got a question about the process for settled status for EU residents of Jersey.
Okay.
Are you going to be expecting there to be an obligation upon employers to verify the settled status of their existing staff? And will there be a grace period for that, or at what point will they have to start looking at those sort of things?
So I think the answer is no. I don't think we'll be looking to employers to validate the status of individuals. There'll be other ways that you can prove how long you have been on the island, and I think actually we can use some of what Social Security has in place to do that. Luke, where are you? Did you want to say anything more about the timeframes, particularly?
I'd say no, because you've answered it all. No, you're right. There will not be an onus on businesses to provide information for their employees to determine their residency. We had a system set up, a data sharing agreement with Social Security, allowing us to access people's data. This mirrors the UK scheme to allow or hope that those people that apply have a simple and easy route through to their status as possible. So we use government data that we can access straight away to prevent them having to do work to assist us or evidence to us what they've got in place. Equally, there won't be an onus on employers to be responsible that those people they employ have that status before they employ them. However, we would hope that we can work with all responsible employees to assist them to make sure their employees are in a situation where they understand what their obligations are, but it won't be an employee responsibility. Employer responsibility.
And in terms of timeframes, when you're going to need to apply it by?
So the scheme's going to open in January. It's going to run for 2 years to the end of 2020. There's going to be a grace period going through to the first 6 months of 2021 to allow those people who've had difficulty, maybe unaware of it, to make application. But if you're not resident or settled here by the end of 2020, you won't be able to be granted settled status through the scheme. That grace period is really just for those people who are basically forgotten for whatever reason have not been contacted through the system.
Okay. Someone must have a question about Brexit. Murray?
Oh, me?
Yes.
What do businesses do? There are businesses that will be making plans, will be understanding. There will be lots of businesses that have not made any plans and actually don't even know where to start. What should they be thinking of doing? Because it's okay, you having your contingency, but what about the business themselves?
Well, of course, there's an onus on individuals to make sure that they've got the right plans in place to deal with some of the risks that might come about by a hard Brexit. We are doing as much as we can as government, and I think you mentioned earlier, was it Murray or Elliot, about the work that we'll be doing with Chamber. Elliot, the work we're doing with Chamber in terms of producing a kind of Brexit readiness kit. Also, government's on hand to answer any questions that you have or to help in any way. So, please feel free to get in contact with us. But by and large, individuals do need to look at their personal circumstances and make sure that you do have contingency plans in place for some of the things that I've been talking about. Yeah, there's one question over here. 2.
Hi, Andrew Lewis. As you all know, we've got a number of agreements in place already that the government's worked on over many years, such as the Bear-Granville agreements and other bilateral agreements we have directly with member states. What's the chances of those remaining in place, or do you have to start all over again?
So many of those agreements are outside the scope of Brexit. They're bilateral agreements that, in many cases, actually sort of predated the EU. However, this is an intensely political process, and of course there is some overlap. I'm wondering particularly if Greg might want to say something about Granville Bay, because that's a very live issue at the moment.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much, as Kate has explained, to the best of our understanding, the agreement sits outside of what could be considered part of the overall Brexit negotiations, because it is a bilateral arrangement between the UK and France. And so, at the moment, whilst there is a review going on of the Granville Bay Agreement, which sets out our relationship with France in terms of fishing, it is slightly separate to the overall Brexit discussions that are happening. Of course, we have to accept, as I say, fishing in particular is very political. You've obviously seen it on the news, and it's something that the UK government has spent a lot of time focusing on as well. So there are links that we have to be aware of. But the other thing I would say is that going forward, we don't quite know what's going to happen, particularly related to fishing, because bilateral relationships, whilst they were perfectly acceptable, whilst the UK was part of the EU, the things have changed slightly. So maybe that going forward in the future, we might have to look to change that. But at the moment, they remain separate. And we fully anticipate that the Granville Bay Agreement will carry on, because it's part of one of the things that's very important in our bilateral relationship with France. It's very well supported by our neighbours in Normandy and in Brittany, as is in Jersey. So it's something we would certainly look and wish to carry on going forward.
I think there was another question over there, Murray, as well, was there? No? Another hand went up. Yep.
We'll go second go if no one else. Simon. All right, go there.
Martin Brailsford. Clearly at these times we tend to focus on change, but on things that might have negative implications. Are we identifying any positive things that may come out of the way that things are developing? I know that really we haven't seen the actual agreement, but Jersey over the centuries has always done very well out of being in no man's land. Not referring this to the First World War, but basically we've always done well being in a sort of fuzzy and grey area, and normally managed to make something of that. Are we beginning to see areas where that might happen, or is it really what we've got now is going to be as good as it gets?
So I think I agree with you actually. I think Jersey's done very well in the past from sort of sitting in that grey area, but I think we're moving to a point where there just needs to be more clarity, and there's an expectation that there's more clarity. And a good example of that, I think, is the approach that the EU is taking to the negotiations. They're looking at things in a lot of detail, perhaps much more detail than the UK expected. And that brings the Crown dependencies more into the spotlight, perhaps, than we might otherwise expected to be. So while I think we've benefited from that in the past, I'm not sure that that's going to be sustainable in the future. And I think, as I was talking about, the EU blacklisting exercise as well, I mean, we just are in the frame now. So that does have implications. But where there are opportunities, they're the sorts of things that I was talking about in relation to trade. I think one thing that Brexit has made us do is to, certainly internationally, from a government perspective, is be much more robust and much more on the front foot, and we've invested in the capability and the expertise that we have, and that means we're better placed to be going out to other jurisdictions and to build relationships with them. And I think we will see some really good outcomes from that over the coming months and years.
Thank you. That was going to be my
question. Oh, right, okay.
Kate, just about talking about the transport, as you were earlier on, how do we test how robust our transport links are going to be in the case of a hard Brexit? We probably just don't even know, do we? Because we haven't got much in the way of contingency, in the way of storage.
No, I mean, as an island that frequently suffers from bad weather, obviously there are contingency plans in place anyway for those essential items. But the problem is with Brexit, what we're looking at is a slightly longer period than we might otherwise have to consider. So as I said earlier, we've been talking to the transport providers and retailers to understand the plans that they have in place and to make sure that we think they're robust. And I mean, Darren's here, and Darren's been actually having those conversations. So perhaps you'd like to say, Darren, something about that.
Thank you. I just support everything you've said. We've done a lot of work in this regard. I think we're more confident than we've ever been in the robustness of our links, both from a sea and air perspective. So we've done a lot of work. We're visiting the entire supply chain from both north and south. So a lot of effort has gone into this. We are an island, obviously we're reliant on our links, particularly to and from the UK. So I support everything you just said.
Thanks.
Hi Kate, Sam McCain. A quick one. The Royal Charters that you alluded to, sort of now perhaps making a more 21st century kind of intergovernmental agreement to replace those. They didn't really make any provision for a common external tariff or product standards. Are those things that are going to crop up in the forthcoming agreement?
Yeah, so if we're in a customs union with the UK, we'll be part of the common external tariff. So that will that's part and parcel of it. I think that previously our customs union with the EU meant that in terms of product standards, where we were sort of trading in those goods, we had the legislation in place to make sure that there was equivalent to the EU and the UK to make sure that goods could move freely. In a similar way, I would envisage that the new customs arrangement will facilitate those things as well. So it will be certainly in terms of what we've enjoyed in the existing relationship, more of the status quo with the UK. Okay. Thank you.
Well, please, could you join me in thanking Group Director of External Relations, Kate Nutt. Okay, so anybody who didn't manage to attend the 250th, or on the way home you forgot to pick up your magazine, there is a magazine on the table. Please have a look through. We do have a couple of spares, so if you want one, then just get in touch with the Chamber office. Our next lunch is the one you don't want to miss. We have a number of bits of entertainment going on. I won't go any further than that, but it's on the 12th of December, Wednesday the 12th of December, and our speaker is going to be Constable of St Heliers, Simon Crowcroft. The only thing that's left for me to do is to thank our sponsor. These events don't happen without sponsorship, so we're massively grateful to the continued support that we've had for many years to RBSI, and I'd like to invite Andrew McLaughlin to come up and say the final thanks. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chamber members, colleagues and customers. It's always a pleasure to support these very important events on our island. I have the happy job, as Elliot says, of saying the thank yous. Probably the first and most important thank you today is to our speaker. Kate, I'm sure you accepted this invitation with alacrity, and you're clearly very well plugged in to time it with the week in which an agreement has been reached between officials, if not between all parties to the bargain. But not only did you accept the invitation with alacrity, I think everyone would agree that you delivered an informative speech on a complex topic, also with alacrity, and that's no mean feat indeed at the moment. I, for one, was very reassured by the level of preparation and planning which you were able to outline, which the states have undertaken over a long period of time now. I would also say not just the quality of that preparation, which is reassuring for all of us in itself, it's also the quality of thinking that's gone into that planning and continues to go into trying to think through the implication of what is certainly an emotive but fairly monumental event for the United Kingdom and every territory connected with it. So I'm not surprised. I wouldn't expect anything else of any major project that's got Ian Gorst's name over the top of it, but I'm greatly reassured, and I do thank you, as we all do, for such an informative speech. I think we should show our appreciation once again to Kate. Second up, I was due to thank the panel. I'm not sure we can describe the Q&A as a panel session, but I'm grateful to so many senior members of the States team who are here today and were available to answer questions, and in some cases ask some questions. And I think you're all around until about 2:30 if people want to saddle up and ask a question one-to-one. I'm not sure you'll get too many opportunities to get so many senior people in the room, so please make the most of that opportunity. But I want to thank everyone who asked a question and indeed answered a question. And I think Martin Brailsford asked a question that many of us had in our head, which is when something like Brexit comes along, one tends to, if you're in business, and even more so if you're in a bank, because a bank is just a risk management organisation, you tend to focus on the potential downsides for your business model, for your strategy, and in our case also for our customers, and you move into protect mode and contingency planning mode. I think it is incumbent upon all of us probably to spend a bit more time trying to figure out how we can make the most of this, whatever our views are on Brexit. Whenever there's big change like this, there is opportunity. It's sometimes harder to see, and it sometimes takes longer to come. But I think it is incumbent upon us to look for it in all of our businesses, but also, of course, in the States. And again, I'm pretty reassured from today's presentation and previous discussions I've had that that is a very live topic within the External Affairs team and indeed in the wider government about how to make the best of this in the long haul for Jersey. So I think, Martin, you did touch on a very important point there. A couple of other thank yous, important thank yous. First of all, a big thank you to the venue, to the POM, and to all of the team here for looking after us so well today, as they always do. I also want to thank Donnell's and Cooper & Co, who've sponsored the drinks on the table and the coffee. We're quite abstemious these days at these events, which is probably a good thing, but nonetheless we really do appreciate, and the Chamber appreciate the support they get from these local important businesses. And my final thank you is to Elliot and Murray and the Chamber. Congratulations again on your 250th anniversary. I wasn't able to attend, but I gather that you did the institution proud with your big bash a few weeks ago. Again, with Murray's hand on it, I wouldn't have expected anything less, and I'm sorry that I missed it, but I know all of my colleagues and the customers who attended absolutely loved it, so very well done indeed. A fantastic institution that we are very proud to have supported and be part of over many, many years. And last but by no means least, to all guests, thank you for your attendance today. I hope you leave informed and reassured, but also ready to go back into your business and try and think about how we make the best of Brexit, whatever it ends up being. We're going to have to get on with it, and there will be opportunity within there alongside our need to protect our existing business model. Thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your working week.